We're in week 2 of the trial of Erin Patterson, and the evidence is coming in thick and fast. If you're listening to our daily shows, you would have heard from different witnesses who described different points in time. So to put this into perspective, on this subscriber episode, we bring back our colleague Anthony Dowsley to order the events in and after that lunch. I'm Brooke Grebert-Craig, and this is The Mushroom Court. So Dows, we're back for another episode with you.
The second week is now done. It's gone quite quickly, and the witnesses have been flying through. It's been bookended this week by Ian Wilkinson starting the week, and the children of Simon and Erin Patterson being the end of the week as witnesses via videotape taped some time ago.
So before we get underway, Dows, can you tell us what the prosecution's and the defence's cases are?
So at the start of this trial, we heard from the prosecution first, and Nanette Rogers SC, Crown Prosecutor, said this was an intentional murder of 3 people and a deliberate act, a voluntary, deliberate act of murder. And it was also the same for the attempted murder. Now, this relates to the deaths of Don Patterson, Gail Patterson, and Heather Wilkinson, and the alleged attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson, who gave evidence this week. Their case relies on Erin Patterson's conduct. They say that she gives these people an invitation to a lunch on the pretense of feeding them death cap mushrooms. They also say that she makes up her cancer diagnoses and that she tells lies apart from this. They say that she looks up a website called iNaturalist to find death cap mushrooms, that she goes to a place called Lock and Outram to source those mushrooms. They also say she lied about never using a dehydrator or owning one, which she did. And they say that she lied about foraging. Now, the defence have admitted that she had a dehydrator, and the defence have admitted that she was a forager. But they say that Erin Patterson was sick from the meal that they ate, and they say this is all a tragic accident, that she panicked, and that her lies are a result of that panic from the lunch. I think it's important to say that Erin Patterson has pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder.
That's a really great summary, Dows. Now let's get to the timeline. And that timeline really began when Erin was in an online true crime group discussing another case with some friends. Let's talk about Erin's participation in a Kelly Lane Facebook group.
So for anyone who doesn't know, Kelly Lane was another infamous case. And the Kelly Lane group is about conjecture about that case. In this group, an online group, they become friends, and Erin is a part of it, and she tells these people online that she has an interest in mushrooms, and a witness said that Erin was also a really good sleuth. They would leave the internet searches to her and she could come up with answers.
Yeah, a super sleuth, I think the witness said.
Yeah. A witness told the court that she had described Simon as controlling and coercive, and it really was, in some ways, the dirty laundry being aired in court, and it would have been difficult to listen to for them, I imagine. She also said that Erin was an atheist.
So Ian Wilkinson took to the stand at the start of the week, as you just mentioned. Can you talk me through what he mentioned about the invitation to the lunch?
Well, his evidence was all about being the sole survivor of the lunch, because he's the only one who can tell that story about what happened, about what they ate, and what happened afterwards from his own perspective as someone who became terribly ill. And his recovery took some time. His invitation to the lunch came as a surprise to him and his wife, Heather. It happened at the church. He wasn't asked personally, but he described his relationship with Erin Patterson as one that didn't have a great deal of depth to it. Obviously, he had known her for many years, but she was just someone that he regarded as ordinary, someone who came to the church, someone who was the mother of 2 children that were his relations. And he unknowingly went to this lunch gathering. He did not know why he was there. All he knew is that the 4 of them, being Don and Gail, and himself and his wife Heather, and Simon Patterson, Erin's estranged husband, had been invited, but he was told as they drove into the driveway all together that Simon Patterson wouldn't be coming to lunch, and that was the first he knew of that.
All of the 4 guests arrived together and Erin greeted them at the door, and then she brought them in and she gave them a tour of her house. We heard that in our daily episodes this week. Can you talk me through what happened next?
Well, they're taken into the lounge dining area. They didn't get the grand tour. The wives, being Heather and Gail, Heather in particular was interested in going into the pantry and having a look around. And in his evidence, Ian Wilkinson said that he noticed a little bit of a reluctance from Erin Patterson about all of this. So he thought that she might have been embarrassed it was messy or something like that. So he didn't go in. But they found themselves out on the veranda pretty much after that, looking at plants and discussing one that was sort of ailing and where it might thrive. And before long, he said that Erin Patterson was dealing with the mashed potato and they were about to be served. He watched the servings and the plates being plated up. Erin plated the foods up, he said. And then he said that Gail and Heather took the grey plates and put them on the table. And Erin Patterson took her own plate, which was smaller. It was an orangey tan colour, he said, and she took that to the table for herself.
And then they sat down at the table and they started eating their food.
Yeah, and he was able to describe where they sat, and he was able to describe some of the conversation. They said grace. There was some chit-chat over lunch. Then they had some, fruit platter and dessert, and they then started onto another conversation where what was a lunch gathering took a very serious turn, and that was when he realised what he was there for.
And what was that?
Ian said that Erin told them that she had cancer and that it was serious and she wanted advice about what to tell her children, whether she should or not, and how to break it to them. And once they had talked about this life-threatening cancer, they prayed.
Okay, now let's move on to the medical evidence that we heard this week. Doctors and nurses took to the stand and gave evidence. Can you talk the listeners through a chronological time of events as to what went down?
So the symptoms of the poisoning began to be felt by Gail and her husband Don and Heather and her husband Ian on the night afterwards. So about 10 hours after the lunch. And they are vomiting, they are having a diarrhoea, and they both go through the night. In the morning, Don and Gail go to Corumburra Hospital by ambulance, and Simon Patterson goes around to Heather and Ian's house, and he actually transports them himself to Leongatha Hospital. So that is on July the 30th, so that's the Sunday. On the Monday morning, that's July the 31st, Erin Patterson presents at Leongatha Hospital, and she's saying that she has symptoms of gastro. But she only spends about 5 minutes at the hospital and discharges herself against the medical advice of the nurses there, who implore her to stay. That was their evidence. They implored her to stay. But she believed she had something to do. She wanted to leave the hospital. She walks out. They ask her, or they tell her, to sign a form, which is being discharged against medical advice, and she does, and she drives away.
And in court this week, we heard from Dr. Chris Webster. We heard a 000 call that he made at that time. Can you talk us through what he said?
So he called 000, talks to a police officer in the end, and he wants that lunch. He wants to see what they have eaten. He also is ringing Erin Patterson to tell her to come back to the hospital. A few calls go unanswered, but eventually, about 2 hours later, Erin Patterson arrives back at the hospital.
And at that time, the police officer who Dr. Chris Webster spoke to is at Erin's house, and he is there to do a welfare check, and he is then tasked to find leftovers of this meal at Erin's house. So where does he find the leftovers?
Well, he puts on some gloves and he's given the code to get through the gate by Erin Patterson, who he speaks to. And he goes in and looks through the bin. He's told where to find the lunch. So he finds a Woolworths bag in the bin, and he looks inside that and he can see about 1.5 beef Wellingtons, if my memory's right. And then from there, he's going to take that to the hospital because the medical experts, they are desperate to know what the 5 people who have presented have eaten.
So do we know what happened with Erin after she returned to the hospital?
Well, the evidence from the medical people is that she's still reluctant to get her children out of school and pretty forceful about this point because he thinks that they could be in danger because they are told that they have eaten leftovers of the beef Wellington meal. She says to him, they'll be scared if you go and get them and bring them to hospital. And Dr. Webster basically says to her, well, they can be scared and be alive, or they could be dead.
Yes, that was quite a bold statement.
It tells you the seriousness of what he realises he's confronting. And he knows the condition of Ian and Gail Wilkinson, and he will be knowing the conditions of Don and Gail, and they are being readied to be transferred to Dandenong Hospital. So they're looking for tertiary hospitals, and they've got this in mind for Erin herself and her children. And that all happens.
And was Erin sick at this point? Can you talk us through what the nurses observed?
Well, the nurses have seen an elevated heart rate for Erin Patterson and blood pressure signs that are higher. But there's also evidence from other medical experts, in particular Cindy Munro, who says that she didn't really think that Erin looked anything like Ian Wilkinson looked. She didn't look anywhere near as sick. And that was a similar evidence from a paramedic, an ambulance officer, who said that Erin was sort of up and talking and chatty in the ambulance. So, part of this case is that the prosecution are alleging that Erin Patterson was never sick, that this was feigning illness. But the defence says, well, she is sick. There's medical evidence to suggest she's sick. She's just not as sick.
And from that paramedic, if we go back to her, she mentioned the journey that they were on to get to Monash Medical Centre with Erin in the back of the ambulance. I think it was over an hour. And she said that at that time, Erin didn't need to go to the toilet.
Yeah, the medical evidence is here that Erin Patterson is nowhere near as sick as the people that came to her lunch, her guests. The defence says that Erin Patterson was sick, and we can move to that now about some of the evidence about that.
Yeah, so in court this week, we heard evidence from Erin's 2 children. They gave their testimonies over a pre-recorded video that the jurors got to watch in the courtroom. So Erin was emotional, wasn't she?
She was. And earlier in the trial, she was emotional when she was watching a video of her son and Don Patterson with a rocket car, which was a little experiment they were doing, which they filmed, where they had a cracker attached to a car which wouldn't work. It just smoked up. And watching all these old films, I think, would be very hard when you're looking at people that are no longer with us, being Don. And now she's looking at her daughter, who is sitting on a blue couch, giving evidence and describing why she's in the predicament that she's in. And the police officer asks her do you know what we're here to talk about? And she says, the lunch.
But she also said that she doesn't know what happened at the lunch because she wasn't there.
That's right. So she knows why she's at the police station, but she can't offer that much about anything where the lunch was. She knows she went to the movies that day. She knows she went to McDonald's before that. She knows she was with her brother, and she knows which film she watched, but she can't actually say anything about the lunch itself. They were told by their mother that she needed to talk to her grandfather and grandmother and her uncle and aunt, or her great uncle and aunt, about something that was adult. The adults needed to talk. That's what she knew.
So the interviewer also asked her questions around mushrooms. The interviewer said, when you cook with Mum, have you ever cooked anything with mushrooms in it? And the daughter replied, no. The interviewer then also asked whether she liked mushrooms, whether in particular she liked eating them, and the daughter also replied no again. And then the interviewer went on to ask about mushroom picking. And once again, the daughter also replied no to that. What else did the daughter talk about, Dowles?
Well, I don't know exactly what they had, she said, but I know we had leftovers. She remembers that.
And that's from the lunch.
That's right. She knew that she had eaten the same food, and she said her mother ate the same food as well, and her brother. And she said that her mother did get sick.
She said that she saw her mother go to the bathroom 10 times.
That's right.
And we also heard evidence from Aaron's son. It was shown to the jury in the exact same way that the daughter's evidence was shown.
Yeah, so these videos were taken, these records of interviews of the children were recorded about 2.5 weeks after the lunch, so sometime in August. So the children, who cannot be identified for legal reasons, were interviewed by a police officer about 2.5 weeks after the July 2023 lunch at Miss Patterson's home. Now, the son is 14 years old, so he's older than his sister, about 5 years, and he had a similar story to tell. He remembers being dropped off at the local McDonald's, and he meets a mate, and they all go off together to see a movie while their mother hosted it, Don and Gail and Heather and Ian, to the lunch. He came home, so he goes back to the Lee and Gather house with his friend, and he actually chatted to the guests who were at the lunch. And he said he remembered taking some plates up to the sink. He said they were white plates, about 15 centimetres in diameter. And he said that he and his friend then played video games for a few hours. And while he was doing that, his mum was building Lego upstairs. And Brooke, the son's observations about his parents' relationship, they did take him to that on the last day of evidence that we've heard. And that was quite interesting.
Yes, so the son said that when he was 7, his parents, Aaron and Simon, had a couple of arguments, and then eventually his mum moved out of the house. He said that they just weren't great relating to each other. The interviewer also asked him to describe his parents' relationship before the lunch, and he said that it was all very negative. And then he went on to say, I know Dad does a lot of things to try to hurt Mum. Okay, let's step away from the timeline for the moment. Dowles, can you paint a picture of how Erin has been in court during week 2?
Well, most of the time she has been described, or she's been viewed as being quite emotionless. She's just intently listening to the evidence, not giving a lot away. She might grab for a tissue, but at moments, especially watching her daughter on a screen from the dock, she breaks, and that's when the tears flow. You know, at the times I've been in court, she has broken a couple of times during the evidence, but the rest of the time she's just looking at the witnesses and taking it all in. You know, when you're in the dock, you're only metres away from where someone is describing your life and the events that have unfolded, which is the reason that you're facing the most serious charges that you can face. And she is facing a triple murder charge and an attempted murder charge. And she is on trial for her life.
Thanks, Dowles. We'll see you back next week.
Thank you. See you, Brooke.
Go to themushroomcook.com.au for all the latest updates, live blogs, features, and more.